The play on the field, the court, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and vendors who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go Behind the Game with Patrick Klinger and Dave Boden.
Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by Blaze Credit Union. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, the pride of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, by way of Glasgow, Kentucky. The president of Blaze Credit Union, the new presenting sponsor behind the game, Dave Boden.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for the nice introduction. Yeah, I moved around a little bit before I got here, so but don't want to take time on me. I want to introduce, we've got a great guest today. Bob Hagan, former Vice President of Football Communications for the Minnesota Vikings, and one of the most recognizable, respected, and beloved names in the NFL public relations community. For 32 seasons, Bob was the cornerstone of the Vikings public relations department and remains a consultant for the organization. So welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
Just to start off right now, you've had a truly legendary career, 32 years with the Minnesota Vikings, where you started as an intern and culminated as a longtime head of public relations for the organization. Tell us a little bit about the journey that you took to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite the journey. I mean, I got out of school and I ended up, I didn't have a job when I got out of school. The job market was tough back in 1990 when I left Iowa State. And so I went back to work at Care TV as an intern. Yep. And, that led me to an intern at the Minnesota Vikings, where Dan Endy, close friend to this day, hired me. So, it's really been a magical run. I mean, this was a team I followed my whole life from being a kid. And so, to land in something like that has been quite remarkable.
Hey, Bob, your boyhood idol was Fran Tarkenton, one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. Fran has become a dear friend of yours now, despite the fact that his NFL career ended long before you joined the Vikings. How is it that you and Fran became such close friends?
Correct. So in 1978 was his last year, and 91 was my first year. But I think it was about midway through the first year, he had called the office needing something, and then the next year he called, 5 or 6 times, and it was just, I was always his go-to guy, so to speak, and we just became, I just became the guy he talked to all the time. I mean, now I talk to him 3-4 times a week, and it's been that way for the last 25 years. And he follows the team. He lives in Atlanta. He follows the team. He follows the entire NFL. He gives me opinions on all the games every week. And, really quite a remarkable guy. It's I always say it's kind of neat as a, my, boyhood idol, so to speak, is now one of my best friends. I mean, how many people can say that? I've yet to meet somebody else that's been able to have that happen.
But an interesting story, you met him when you were something like 10 years old.
I was 10. He was in his last year. And I even got to tell this story at his 80th birthday party 4 years ago. But so my mom, she gave me a note. I had to get out of school. I was 10 years old. I was in 4th grade. She gave me a note to get out of school to go to a dentist appointment. And she came and she picked me up for school. And we started driving into downtown Wayzata. And I was like, Mom, that's the dentist office right there. She goes, oh, we got to go somewhere else first. And it turns out I didn't have a dentist appointment. She took me down to a little one-of-a-kind or a one-off bookshop in downtown Wayzata, where Fran Tarkenton was doing a private book signing. And so, by the time I was 10 years old, I had already been Fran Tarkenton 4 or 5 times for Halloween. And so my mom, dressed me that day for school and like, oh, you should wear your Tarkenton jersey today. Oh, okay. So, so I had it on when I met him. And I mean, I can remember it like it was yesterday. Of course, Fran doesn't remember. He signed 1 million autographs, but I've told the story to him, numerous times. But I walked up to him, and I'm like, okay, what do I say? I can't just say, oh, you're the greatest quarterback of all time. I wanted to think of something different, so I said, he's like, what's your name? And I was like, Bob, nice to see you. And then I kind of cut him off, and I said, you and I have the same birthday. And he looked at me, and he's like, well, then your birthday must be February the 3rd. And that's how he said it. And I was like, how did he know that? Even though I had just told him that our birthdays were the same. So it's great. I still have the, he signed a picture for me that day too, other than the book. It was in that old purple felt tip, which is totally faded. You can see where it was, where his autograph was written in there. But it's kind of a neat story to meet him for the first time, and it also shows a lot about my mom. That she knew how special this would be, and my mom was a frequent person at this bookshop, and for it to all just work out that way was pretty special.
It's a pretty cool story. If you think about your work life in professional sports, there is a line, when you're in the sports business, a pretty good line between the front office and that type of work and the locker room itself. And how did you respect those boundaries and yet develop such strong relationships with players and coaches?
Yeah, sometimes it's a tough thing to navigate. It's not everybody is always on everybody's side. When it comes to sports, or a team's going through a rough spell, or a player or a coach is going through a rough spell. But I tried to be fairly even keel, and I was one of these people that I always tried, whether it was high school or college. I was that person that always tried to get along with everybody. One of my friends nicknamed me Mr. Switzerland. I don't know that I like that nickname, but it's like, but I said I tried to always mend relationships where I could, whether if it was a media and a player not getting along, tried to bridge that gap and try to find some common ground with them in the best I could. It doesn't always
good
work.
Trait to have, I think, in life in general.
When I hear the name Bob Hagan, the first word that comes to mind is always relationships. You could teach a master's class in relationships. How is it that you've been able to make such strong connections with players, with media, with front office?
I just like being around people, and people they look, and I know some people on the weekends they want to just be home and whatever, and I do a ton with my family, but I want to be doing something. I want to be out. I want to be at a game, at a concert, at a movie, at a restaurant. I always want to be doing something, and I'm kind of like I at least need to do one event a day is kind of my deal, and sometimes it's 2 or 3. It just depends, and I I think part of it with the Vikings, how I was always well connected with all my friends from college and high school, but when I started at the Vikings in 1991, there's no cell phones, and it cost a lot to call long distance back then. And some of your listeners might not know that, but it cost a lot per minute to call, so you didn't do that much. And who wants to sit down and write letters to people? But my job really helped, because I was going to 10 cities a year, whether it was preseason or regular season, or the playoffs, it's even more. And so I could connect with so many of my friends back when that was a time when people kind of unconnected, because you couldn't, somebody moved to San Francisco, you wouldn't ever talk to them. But I would get a group, I would have 4 to 8 people at every game ever for in my entire career. And some I'd have 20 and 30. If it was Tampa Bay and it was late in the year, everyone's like, we're all going to Tampa Bay. And it's like, so, that's where I just always kind of wanted to be the ringleader. I'm still doing it today, trying to get, groups of people to go to concerts. I'm called the concert bully, where I tried to, always try to get people to come and join in. And so, I don't know if that's part of who I am.
Well, building relationships, and you talked about it with the locker room and other things, but and you've met a ton of people. So here's one everybody knows: Sid Hartman was a true Minnesota media legend, a close personal friend of yours. But let's be honest, Sid wasn't always easy to deal with. Tell us about your relationship with Sid and how you managed to manage him.
Yeah, I mean, you got that right. I mean, people know around it. He wasn't always easy, but the one thing is, I knew when he came to our office, especially even the later years, but the earlier years also, the later years, probably because of his mobility, was harder. I knew I was going to have to work 3 times harder because he wanted 3 times as much, and he, just as soon as you got done getting him the starting quarterback, and you thought he was going to be like, thanks, I really appreciate it. He's like, now I need this guy, now he needs the next best player, or the head coach. So, we started developing a relationship really from year one. And I remember when I walked in and a couple of people told me, hey, listen, this guy's not going to be around much longer. He was 70, and I was 22, and he lasted another 30 years, 30 years. And we went to hundreds of dinners, together, and we had a ton of fun, and we would get other people involved and bring people. He brought me to dinners, that he had with, Bobby Knight and stuff like that. And he was fun to be around. We had so many laughs and good times. He's kind of obviously a legendary figure, but I think what some people miss is how instrumental he was in the history of professional sports in this town.
Yeah. Bob, you've got a great story about Sid and Prince at Super Bowl 41 in Miami when Prince was performing the halftime show.
Yeah. So, it turned out to be the last Super Bowl Sid would come to, and the condensed version of the story is that the NFL had approximately 5,000 credentials given out during the week of the game. Not, for the actual game, but the week of the game credentials. And the rule always was that each individual has to pick up their credential. No matter who you were, no matter how big you were, that person had to pick up that credential. You couldn't have somebody do it for you, no matter who you were. So, except for Sid, because the league didn't want to, he would just, raise a stink with a bunch of the higher ups. They're like, listen, they wanted to take it off their shoulders and they put it on mine. They're like, Bob, you take care of Sid. So he's the only one they'd do this for. So the day he calls me, and he had a place in Florida at the time, and he calls me and he says, hey, I want to come over there and get my credential. I go, what time you come in? And he says 2 o'clock or something like that. And I'm like, that's not going to work. I said, I'm assigned to work at Prince was doing the halftime show, and he was doing his press conference, which was going to have about 1,500 media members at. He was doing his pre-press conference on that Thursday, and Sid said, well, I'll come over early. I'd like to meet that guy. And he's talking to me like he's meeting the backup Vikings outside linebacker. It's like, I go, I can't make that happen. I'm like, that's not going to happen. And we're on the phone, and his hearing is bad, but his hearing was always selectively bad. When it was, when it was bad news, he couldn't hear you. When it was great news, he could hear you. Interview with Favre, yeah, I'll be over there. All of a sudden he could hear perfect. So he says, he goes, I can't hear you. And I'm like, okay. So I'm just like, well, I'll wait. He got over there an hour and a half later, and we go through the whole thing again. And I said, I have no connection to Prince. I can't. This is different. This is different than anything. I'm like, and he sat there and he goes, you're not even gonna try for me. He was just so upset. And I go, okay, I'll try. So we get to this. I didn't know how many checkpoints there were, but we get to checkpoint 1. I'm like, I just told Sid, because sometimes his mouth can get too big. I'm like, don't say a word. I said, don't say a word, Sid. Okay, so he's dressed in a suit. You know, most people, a suit and a tie. Most people aren't. That helps. You know, he's about 90 years old at the time. That helps. I just don't say a word. And my credential was a credential that was all access, could get me anywhere. His was a media credential. Couldn't get him to the places we were going. The first guy just let us go. You know, the second guy, the second checkpoint we get to, you know, they're like, I just started talking, and I just said, he's with me. I'm in charge of this area. He needs to go with me. And, you know, 45 seconds later, we were in. But then we get to the third checkpoint, which turned out to be the final checkpoint. And they said, nobody goes by us. And there's all these security guys there. And, you know, some of them are security for the building, some are security for the NFL, some of them are security for Prince, and they're like, nobody goes by here. And I'm like, okay, what do I say? You know, and the one guy I'm dealing with, I'm like, sir, with all due respect, the guy who's about to go on stage and the gentleman next to me are the two most famous people in the state of Minnesota. And he made the decision to let us go. So we get by them, and Prince is walking down this hall. He's 75 feet away. He's a ways away. And he is 5 feet from turning the corner to go out to this whole production. And Sid yells at the top of his lungs, "Hey, Prince! Hey, Prince!" And we have 8 security guys accosting both of us. We're like up against a wall. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And Prince is at the very end of the hall. And he's at the very end of the hall, and he turns around, just his head. He turns all the way around and sees who it is, and he walks all the way back to where we are to see him, because he knew who Sid was, and he respected him. And they had a great conversation there, and Sid still thinks that was an easy thing to pull off. You know, like he never knew, you know, for the rest of his life that was just supposed to happen. He's like, that Prince guy is a pretty nice guy. And then they were, you know, talked about it, and then they saw each other a few times later at Timberwolves games and stuff. So yeah, it was quite the day that Sid met Prince. I mean, I tell people, my friends, I just said, just Google Sid and Prince, and you'll find the story.
It was pretty good thinking of two most famous people too, to try, because you're probably like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I thought of that on this, like there at that second. I was not thinking that as I was taking him through.
So I got a quick left turn, just because of the story. So it sounds like you're a big concert guy, along with sports and football and Super Bowls. So did you see the halftime show with Prince? And is it, I mean, I believe the best ever still.
Yes. It was the best ever. I mean, I've been to 19 of those halftime shows, and it just, I think it's so far ahead of the next one, in my opinion, because and it did help that it rained.
Yeah,
it did help that it. I mean, it was raining pretty good, and it just, you know, I think it just captivated America, you know, or the world, you know, was watching this. I mean, it was, you know, quite the performance. It was very special.
Yeah, that would have been very cool to see. So you were also very close with Vikings Hall of Fame coach Bud Grant, who passed away the day before you were scheduled to speak at your retirement.
Actually, 2 days after.
Oh, 2 days after.
Two days after. He was scheduled to speak that night, but then he was sick, and we just thought he was sick, but we didn't know that, you know, the end was coming.
So he may have been the greatest leader in Vikings history, certainly. What lessons did you learn? What did you learn from Bud?
You know, Fran Tarkenton says this all the time, that he's never met a person in his life that had more common sense than Bud. And you know, Bud was, you know, he would question you on things. You want him to do something, I mean, he'd be like, why? And then he would have some good reasons not to do certain things. And I mean, every time I was around him, I learned something new from him. And last year, well, now it's a year and a half, but in 2022, he met with Kevin O'Connell every week, and I was part of that. I helped set that up at the beginning, and Kevin liked it so much, and we'd meet with him every Thursday for 15, 20 minutes, and I would chime in here or there when I needed to, and the conversation was almost nothing about football. It was about life and stuff, and those two became close, and it just I always liked that time of the weeks seeing Kevin O'Connell, because I mean, he's working 15, 16-hour days minimum, and then for that 15 minutes it just kind of, it almost just relaxed him. And and other coaches too, I mean, most all the other coaches had good relationships with Bud over that time. But I loved all my time being with Bud, and there were so many lunches I would have with Bud and Sid and Fred Zamberletti and Paul Wiggin, who's still with us at the Vikings today. And I mean, those to me were just legendary times.
Bob, communication has changed so much from when you got into the business, right? Back then, there was really no internet. Mm-hmm. There wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Instagram, there certainly wasn't Twitter, right? All of those things developed while you were with the Vikings. How did your job change over the years to go from none of that to all of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And, I mean, at first I would get nervous every day when I'd go out to get the newspaper in my early years, because a guy would have a story, and he might have it at noon the day before, and you don't see it until it arrives on your doorstep the next day. And so now all of a sudden, let's say it was a bad story. It's like, okay, now we have to react to it. You have all day to react to it, because the statement's going out sometime in the afternoon, and it's not hitting the paper until the next day. Is how that news cycle would work. But now somebody does something, and people are expecting an answer in 3 minutes, and it's like, well, we gotta take a little time. We gotta find out the facts, and 20 minutes later, like, what are you guys going to say about this? And you're still like, hold on, but everything's so immediate now, and everybody's their own media person, or the person of fame. Just an average fan. For an average fan back in the day, there was only a few hours of sports radio each week, and you had to sit and call into a show, it's a Sid show or somebody else's show, and be on hold for an hour and a half, and then get in your question. Now you just pick up your computer and you type in whatever you think of the coach or the team or whatever, and you have a voice. So it's changed quite a bit. I wish some things could go back. It's never going to, but not everything changed for the better with some of that. But there were things that changed for the better, where if we had a great story, we could get it out right away.
So you've talked about a couple already, but sports is full of interesting characters on and off the field. Do you have a few favorites or a few stories to share about who you enjoyed?
As players or coaches? I mean,
to work with, or just interesting characters regardless of their position.
Yeah, we had we had a ton of guys that I really like. I mean, it's hard to narrow in on one or two. I was so close to so many guys for 31 years. I still stay in touch with all the living head coaches. I still see all of them at least once a year. I mean, I've had lunch or dinner with Mike Tice and Brad Childress in the last month. I've talked to Mike Zimmer on the phone numerous times. So the coaches, but I will bring up one coach that did pass away was Jerry Burns, because he was the head coach in my first year at the team. And, he was a character, beyond characters. I mean, you can look up the famous clip.
From the outside, it certainly seemed
yeah,
like it.
but he had a heart of gold. He never once, when he saw me, didn't ask me about, my family and what they were doing, how they were doing. I mean, we were together 1 year, and we had an incredible year. I was an intern, but I had to deal with him every day. There were so few people working there, and I had to do a ton with him. And then he ends up sitting in the press box next to me for 27 years. And how that happened was that first year that he was out of coaching, Vikings were hiring him, and he was going into suites and hobnobbing with the sponsors and people. And as much as he liked to have a beer here or there, he wouldn't be having beer in that situation. And he's like, these people weren't. A lot of them in the suites weren't paying attention to the game. So he came to me one day and he said, I want to be able to watch the game. Where could I do that? And I go, how about the seat right next to me? And he said, perfect. And I mean, it was incredible for me, because this guy knew football inside out. He taught me so much, but at the same time, he could be really funny, and then he could be a minute later be super serious, and he was unbelievable. And I developed such a good relationship with him and his whole family, and Patrick would notice at the Metrodome press box, the fans, they walked right by. They were as close to us as you are right now, and we were in the second row, and these fans would come by and they'd look up there. They'd be leaving the game. We'd have the game in hand. We're doing kneel downs or something, and they would walk by, and they'd be like, "Hey, Bernsey, you're the greatest. You're the greatest." And Bernsey one time, he did this multiple times, but he'd say, as that person's name, he goes, "Hey, that's the same blah 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 guy who was trying to run me out of town, 10 years ago. It's the same guy. I'm the greatest. So.
Well, Bob, we have time for two more questions. We've got 1 minute left in the show. So, a table for 5 in the Winter Park cafeteria. Who are the other 4?
That's hard, although I kind of answered it before, just because we did it so many times together, and I have, I told before, I have so many favorites. But when I would sit at a lunch table with Bud Grant and Sid Hartman and Fred Zamberletti and Paul Wiggin, I mean, that's
pretty good.
200 years of NFL experience. I mean, every time I would think, I've heard all these stories, and every time it was brand new stories, every time. And we did this hundreds of times. So that was, I cherish those moments forever. And still, when I go over to the Vikings now as a consultant, I sit with Paul Wiggin when he's there and have lunch with him. The other 3 have passed away, but great memories.
Yeah, great memories. Well, I promised 2 questions. We're already over time, but quickly, favorite pizza place?
Village Square Pizza in Walker, Minnesota, where my cabin is.
Thanks. Bob Hagan, thanks so much for being on Behind the Game. You've been as elusive as Sasquatch trying to get you here on the show, but finally we made it happen. Dave Boden, always great to see you. Thanks for co-hosting. Thank you for being.
Thanks for having me.
For Blaze being the presenting sponsor of Behind the Game, and thank all of you for watching, and we'll see you again next month.